Early on in the season, the Denver Broncos are facing several big roster questions. We'll take a look at three of them we feel very strongly about, and we'll dive deep into that on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
1-5 is not an ideal start here for this Denver Broncos football team, despite the expectations going to the offseason. There are now several big roster questions we're going to talk about on today's episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much once again to everybody in Broncos Country for taking time out of your day to listen or to watch us on YouTube or for wherever you get your podcast for free. Do us a favor, subscribe or follow so you never miss out on any days worth of Broncos news, content, coverage, and more. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Some roster questions now here, Sayre, as the team sits at a 1-5 record. I think when we look position by position, there's obviously, I think, some questions for almost every position here on this team. But overall, I think for where Denver is at right now, some of the biggest ones that maybe we should talk about and maybe what maybe some long-term solutions could be for them. Very, very interesting. So let's start things off here first and foremost, the tight end position here for the Broncos. And I think it's fair to maybe ask the question here, did the Broncos put too many eggs in the Greg Dulcich basket, even though how talented he is, considering the knowledge beforehand that he's been dealing with some hamstring injuries prior? Now that's impacting him twice so far into this season.
I think the short answer to that question, Cody, is yes, they did put way too many eggs in this basket. Look, we all understood going into that 2022 NFL draft, the Broncos had limited capital, didn't have a pick till round 3. In that 2022 NFL draft, remember, it was Greg Dulcich and Trey McBride at the top of the tight end class. And Trey McBride didn't end up going till late in the second round. Dulcich obviously lasted into the third. The Broncos actually traded down and still got Dulcich. So, I mean, obviously he was a third-round pick. They liked him a lot coming out of college, but at the same time, they were willing to miss out on him by trading down and then selecting Nik Bonitto ahead of him there. So you kind of have to wonder, like, what was it about him that made them fine missing out on him, but then also being like, all right, well, he lasted to this pick. Now we're going to take him. I just didn't agree with the strategy whatsoever, Cody, of passing on 2 straight, pretty talented free agent classes. And we don't need to have like a discussion in the comments about, well, the Broncos did sign free agents. They signed Eric Tomlinson and they signed Chris Manhertz. I get it. They signed some guys, but there was way better, more impactful players available at a tight end market that's really been team friendly. And then you pass on the 2023 NFL draft, which was really, Cody, I think going into it, you could have seen starters, maybe 10 to 12 starting caliber guys within the first 2 to 3 days of the draft. And the Broncos passed on all of them. They didn't draft a single one. They had opportunities to draft a number of these guys, didn't do it. They brought a few of them into the building for visits. I think they knew this could be a situation, but now we have to really kind of come to grips with the fact Greg Dulcich has been dealing with a hamstring injury, a hamstring issue since June of 2022. This is ongoing, and it's a huge reason why I think the Broncos offense has been a bit too one-dimensional.
Well, and we talked to Broncos head coach Sean Payton on Monday morning, and we asked about Greg Dulcich, his injury, and he said right now the goal for them is to get him to where he needs to be. They felt like with all the information that they had with the medical team, with where Greg was at in terms of testing, is that they felt like based on all the information and data they gathered, he was ready to return. It's just one of those things. And he even acknowledged, he said, nobody's more frustrated right now than Dulcich is, that he's continually dealing with this issue. And I think sometimes when injuries happen like this, or, a guy like Dulcich, I think a lot of fans take it personal and they usually direct it in a negative way towards a player. But, Greg Dulcich wishes he could be out there. Obviously, he's very, very explosive. And when he's out there, I think the Broncos offense is significantly better than what they have been without him. But you also look at maybe where Denver's at, and you mentioned the trade for Adam Troutman during the NFL draft. I mean, that was another draft day pick that they got here. Now, while I think Troutman can be a reliable, receiving option, the one thing that he really lacks there that is hurting so much at that position, he just doesn't have speed. He's not fast. He's not explosive. And I think that right there is probably where the issue is compacted with the tight end position, because Chris Manhurts is big, right? But doesn't have a large sample size of catches throughout his career. They've tried to go to him a couple of times in the passing game. I think he's had one catch so far this season, if I'm not mistaken. So 28 career catches so far for him, or 25. It's one or the other here. I think it's 25 here. But regardless, my point being, Denver doesn't have production at the tight end position, right? And so when you're not getting production at the tight end position, teams can take away your receiving options. It's harder to get things going in the passing game. That's why Denver, I think, has had to go back to start running the football, which I think they got off to a great start running the ball against Kansas City, but then they went away from it to go into the passing game. And unfortunately, things just kind of crumpled there because Denver is very one-dimensional right now. And I think the impact at tight end is a big reason why. And I don't know, Sayre, for me, part of me is wondering here, what does Denver do? Because obviously with hamstring re-aggravation, I don't know when we're going to see Greg Dulcich again this season, though Sean Payton didn't give a timeline or anything like that, and it didn't sound like they're going to place him on injured reserve. He's going to be out several weeks more than likely here once again.
Yeah, I mean, it puts you in a real pickle because you traded Albert Okwuegbunam once again, and we're not going to sit here and say, well, Albert would be going to the Pro Bowl if he had gotten this opportunity. That's not what we're saying. But look,
No.
You didn't set yourself up. The question we're asking is, did you put too many eggs in the Greg Dulcich basket? The answer is obviously yes. You obviously believe that he was much more reliable than he's turned out to be, which is unfortunate. Like you said, nobody's more frustrated than Dulcich. But look, when you have a guy that has hamstring issues, you have to hedge those bets. You have to make sure that you have proper depth behind him. And he didn't even win the starting job coming out of training camp, Cody. I know that's maybe much to do about nothing, but I mean, he was listed as number 2 on the depth chart from the get-go. So I don't know. Is it this coaching staff? Are they trying to be more coy with Greg Dulcich? Did they not like him as much as the front office liked him last year? Like you said, he's an explosive player, but you need to have at least some kind of contingency if that guy can't go, especially when he's a young player, especially when you're passing on good free agents, good quality NFL draft prospects. I just think that the Broncos, they set themselves up kind of to fail here in a way. And unfortunately, yeah, they didn't have 10 or 12 draft picks in 2023 to be able to just say, all right, let's take this tight end here, or let's move up for this guy. I know they didn't have that kind of luxury, but man, you really wanted to see them maybe do a little more at a key position, and they just didn't do it.
Now we'll see what Denver decides to do going forward. But Broncos country, how concerned are you about the Broncos' overall outlook right now at tight end, considering Greg Dulcich's injury? And obviously right now, I think it maybe adds a question, like what is a big need for this team in the offseason? Tight end is now starting to creep up that list here a little bit. So Broncos country, eager to hear from you if you're watching on YouTube or listening wherever you get your podcast. But another conversation we're going to talk about involves one of the Broncos' key free agent signings this offseason. What's going on with Mike McGlinchey, and did the Broncos front office maybe overvalue what they saw? We'll dive deeper into that in today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Do you ever feel like your brain is getting in its own way? Like you know what you should do, what's good for you, but you just can't do it? Therapy helps you figure out what's holding you back so you can work for yourself instead of against yourself here. Now, I've used BetterHelp therapy in the past. One thing I did was I signed up, and it matched me with a therapist in just moments after filling out a brief survey. Luckily, I hit it off really well with my therapist. But if you don't vibe well with your therapist, you can change therapists at any time at no additional cost to you with BetterHelp. And if you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, and also suited to your schedule. That's the best part about it. You do it when it works best for you. Just fill out a brief questionnaire, and then you'll get matched with a licensed therapist. And like I said, you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. Make your brain your friend with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon today to get 10% off your first month. Once again, BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/locked on. This show was also brought to you by our friends over there at DoorDash. Did the game go to a timeout? Well, it's time to order in with DoorDash. Is it halftime? That's ordering time. 2-minute warning? You got it. That's your cue to order in. And whenever the game clock stops, that's the time to order in with DoorDash. Order pizza, wings, soda, burgers, or even just buns on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game. Or you can order chips, dips, nachos, and everything you need to make your own nachos on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game. Kick back at kickoff with unbeatable deals on everything that you need for any watch party or tailgate. Score football season's best deals on groceries, restaurants, retail, and more. Plus, you get all of your favorite restaurants and stores from retail to grocery all on an app so you can shop everything that you need to get ready for game day. Get 50% off up to $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter code LOCK23. Subject to change, terms apply. That's 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app today. And once again, enter code LOCKed23. Subject to change. Terms apply.
One of the major questions that needs to be asked as we head into week 7 of the 2023 NFL season: did the Denver Broncos pro scouting department get a little too desperate when they went after Mike McGlinchey in free agency, giving him a 5-year contract worth $52.5 million in guaranteed money? Cody, the right tackle position has been kind of a cursed one for the Denver Broncos, and we're going to talk about Mike McGlinchey. We're going to talk about maybe breaking the curse or whether or not he's kind of falling in line with all that. But before we do, I want to give a huge shout out to every single one of you that makes Locked On Broncos your first listen of the day every single day right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, free and available on YouTube as well as wherever you can get your podcast. Cody and I appreciate you for making us part of your day, however you choose to do so. If you're walking on the treadmill right now, if you're driving in the car, if you're sitting on the couch watching us on YouTube, we appreciate you for making us part of your day, especially those of you that participate in the discussion. And Cody, I think this is worth discussing here, and I'm eager to hear from everybody who listens to the show as well. Was the pro scouting department way off on Mike McGlinchey? Was this a desperation move by the Broncos? Could they have gone a different route? I think this is a question that has layers to it, but I kind of want to start off with just, were they off in their assessment of McGlinchey, who had 5 years in San Francisco of tape to kind of go off of, now that they've signed him to this big money free agent deal and we've seen him for 6 weeks kind of struggling?
Well, I think when you look at maybe the overall body of work, I think coming into it, when the signing happened, there were a lot of people in Broncos country that weren't very happy about it because there were times, obviously, he struggled in pass protection. But I think a lot of that came after a year. What injury did he have in San Francisco? I'm trying to remember. He had a pretty significant one that impacted, I think, something, his ability to have strength inside of his legs. But overall, Sayre, I also think at the same time, when you look at where Denver was at, needing a real legitimate option there, I think Mike McGlinchey was the big name, right? He was the big name available. I know there were some other options out there that we had discussed, and some guys obviously went elsewhere. You had the tackle for the Jacksonville Jaguars go to Kansas City, and part of me is wondering, if Denver maybe made a push for him, would the results still be the same thing? Or is this issue right here what we're seeing with Mike McGlinchey? Part of me is also wondering this. Is this maybe scheme relative? Is it coaching relative? Because obviously Zach Strief, and I don't want to say it's his fault, but I'm saying you have a first-year position coach. Is this where part of the struggles are at? Because ideally you have Quinn Miners and Mike McGlinchey. These two guys should be really good together on the right side there, but Denver has struggled in pass protection on the right side there, and McGlinchey has certainly as well.
Yeah, struggling in pass protection, struggling with those penalties, right? Obviously, he's earned the nickname, unfortunately, McFlinchy, Cody. I'm sure that was a thing in San Francisco as well. But man, all the false starts, untimely holding calls, bad pass protection, it just hasn't been there for a guy who's got a 5-year deal in free agency worth $52.5 million in guaranteed money. I know he wears the captain's C on his chest, and I know that he's obviously been a key maybe leader inside that locker room, but at some
Yeah.
point, I think you have to expect your captains to go out there and be your best players on the field, not just the best guys, in the locker room. Like, as far as like being good guys, I'm sure Mike McGlinchey is a good guy, and I'm sure he's
Fantastic guy.
well liked.
Yeah.
Fantastic guy who carries himself very well professionally. Obviously, that's all great. You got to have production on the field. You got to be able to lock down that side of the offensive line so that we're not sitting here on Locked On Broncos talking after games like, man, the pass protection off right tackle was so bad in this game, the Broncos couldn't do anything downfield. That's where I think we've been. And unfortunately, I'm not a offensive line expert, Cody, so I can't sit here and say, well, he's got this sort of technique that he's doing wrong, or he's not taking a deep enough drop here, or he's not setting anchor here. I don't know all that stuff in depth, but what I do know is do you pass the eye test, or are you playing so poorly that unfortunately it's obvious you're the one to blame? I feel like that's kind of where we're at with McGlinchey, and it all traces back to pro scouting plus Sean Payton ultimately making the call to tell George Payton, go get this guy.
Part of me is also wondering too, going back, and I'll have to go back and find Sean Payton's conference, or Mike McGlinchey, because I know we didn't get introduced to them when they were signed as free agents. They didn't hold any press conferences, which I felt like was an odd situation there. You talk about the penalties for McGlinchey, and certainly I think that is something that stands out because, I mean, Sayre, that was something that stood out during training camp. During training camp, he had various false starts that impacted the Broncos there. And so for me, are you thinking too much, right? In the coaching world, we always talk to our players, and one of the things we always kind of gather is, okay, hey, if you're having pre-snap penalties, it means you're not focused by the time that the ball is snapped. You're thinking too much, and you're maybe overreactionary in a sense to a movement or the first noise that you hear. So what is it? Is that something that can be fixed? And which I think it can be from McGlinchey here. But I think so much of me too, and I think we need to see a little bit more. But I think as we approach the bye week, I think one thing I'll look forward to maybe asking Sean Payton is, Mike McGlinchey's had a variety of ups and downs so far to start the season. In your opinion, what's been the biggest indicator for some of his issues that he's had? But also, sir, at the same time, look, we're talking about right tackle. Garrett Bowles, I thought, got off to a pretty solid start to the season, but he's also taken a step backward as well. And look, his contract could be expiring after this year. Denver could move on from him. So right now, for me, I look at offensive tackle in general for the Denver Broncos right now, and I'm not so comfortable with where they're at. And I think McGlinchey can turn it around. Like I said, he's got the great mindset. He's got a great attitude, and he's got the work ethic, I think, to maybe get some stuff right. But is it scheme relative, and is it fixable? And I think it is, and I think he can get there. But you were right. You signed a big-time contract in free agency. You haven't looked like it so far, and that right there is going to skew the optics a little bit in the eyes of the fan base.
Yeah, and I think what Sean Payton needs to be kind of held his feet to the fire about is this big money acquisition working out the way that you planned? Like, you spent 52.5 million guaranteed. Is that going how you expected based on that investment, right? And is it going to affect or impact the future if it's not? Because Cody, this is one of the most important positions on the field, either side of the ball, outside of quarterback, right? Offensive tackle, right or left, it doesn't matter. If you're constantly giving up pressure, if Max Crosby and all these other guys, we saw the Kansas City Chiefs. This is your telltale sign. Kansas City Chiefs lined Chris Jones up against Mike McGlinchey frequently in this game. And the reason they do that, well, they're putting him where they feel like he has the best chance to impact the play, right? They're obviously putting Chris Jones against the guy that they feel he can win against. That's your clearest indicator right now. And I think something that Sean Payton needs to answer is, hey, you guys went out and spent all this money in free agency on Mike McGlinchey. Are you getting the return on investment that you feel like you should be from that move? Because that's a 3-year minimum type of move. When you're talking about $52.5 million, that's putting him at what, 18 million roughly per season, something like that, 17, 18 million per season for 3 years. This is year one, and we're not even to game 7. And it already looks like, wow, did you waste a bunch of money there? Not on a bad guy, but on potentially a player who, hey, there were some signs in San Francisco. We want to see more of that run blocking Mike McGlinchey. If that's what he's so good at, then put him in more situations where he can win, and then let your passing game kind of build off of that, if that's the situation. But you can't have Chris Manhertz chipping with Mike McGlinchey every single play, because as we've discussed, then that limits how many receivers you can have running routes, which causes Russell Wilson to have to throw again, 2 against 4 in the secondary. So it's a domino effect that can't be started by a player who's on a 5-year deal worth $52.5 million guaranteed.
I think those are all very fair points. In Broncos country, we want to know what you think about this whole situation, your outlook at offensive tackle, where Mike McGlinchey has been at, and some of the struggles he's had here early on in his season. Make sure if you're watching on YouTube, you comment down below. If you're listening on social media, wherever you get your podcast, you can always interact with us at Cody Roark NFL on Twitter and on Threads. Threads popping, by the way. Hit me up over there. I love it over there. And also at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. You can get involved in the conversation and the discussion every single day, all year long. We have another question as well as it pertains to a very, very important position for the Broncos. And we talk about the need for a dominant player here Could the Denver Broncos maybe have some emerging young edge players who could become that premier dominant outside force? Well, we're going to discuss that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And if you've ever had a frustrating ticket buying experience, Game Time helps alleviate a lot of the issues you may have run into in the past. For example, if you've gone to a concert, a sporting event, you weren't sure what your seat view was going to look like before you got there. Well, Game Time, they take that away and they give you that all within their app. And you shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, all the music, comedy, and theater events that are going on near you. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event. And even an hour after it starts, it's the best place to find the last-minute seats all in one place. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. With zone deals, you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats for an average of 18% savings. And the Game Time guarantee means that you always get the best price. And if you find tickets in the same section and roll for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. As we jump into the fourth quarter action on today's episode of Locked On Broncos, we'll dive deep into the conversation about the Broncos edge rusher position. Several young players that they have featured there stepping up into big roles, but can they emerge into becoming potential superstars? That's a great question that we're going to ask on today's episode of the show. Just real quick, want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos Country for tuning in, making us your first listen of the day. Every single day, you can get this podcast for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Sayre, let's open it up here. I think this is a very valid question. State of the roster as we approach the bye week coming up here in about 2 weeks. There's been some decisions made by the Broncos in the last 2 weeks, combined with Randy Gregory and Frank Clark. And now it seems that they're moving forward with young guys at edge rusher. We've seen Jonathon Cooper step up as probably the most, consistent player from training camp to now. Nik Bonitto's been the most improved player on the roster from last year to this year. And then you're getting Baron Browning back, who we all know has all those potential elite traits. If he can piece it all together, could become something very special. Can any of these Broncos edge players maybe emerge into long-term fixtures here for this roster at that position?
I feel oddly optimistic about this position group, Cody, which goes back to something we touched on and you said in training camp, like maybe this year's edge position could kind of turn out to be what last year's inside linebacker position was. And what do we mean by that? Well, went into last year's training camp thinking inside linebacker could be the worst position on the group. Kind of felt the same way about edge this year. And I would say we've sort of seen that come true in ways, and we've also seen it debunked in ways, right? We've seen it come true in the fact that, well, you had to trade Randy Gregory away. You had to cut Frank Clark, but you've also seen the emergence of, like you talked about, these young players, Jonathon Cooper, Nik Bonitto, hopefully soon Baron Browning. I'm excited about these players. I really am, especially with Baron Browning coming back. I think he has the highest upside out of any of these players. And we're seeing Nik Bonitto on pace for, I believe, this season, Cody, 16 sacks. So when you piece this all together, hey, the Broncos may have something cooking here. And not only that, but these guys are under contract for a bit. I believe, obviously, Jonathon Cooper and Baron Browning, both drafted in 2021. They're still under contract next year. And then Bonitto has another contract year behind that. So really team friendly right now. You're getting an opportunity to honestly evaluate these guys and get them snaps. And I also like the addition and inclusion of Ronnie Perkins into the mix.
100%. And I think another thing as well, when we talk about, you look at some mock draft simulators, which, by the way, folks, you know my stance on that. I'm not doing mock drafts this early into it. But you look at what some outlets have deemed as like the biggest need for the Broncos. Edge rusher, for some reasons, become the biggest one, which to me, I don't necessarily agree with. And I've seen some people already mock the Alabama edge rusher to the Denver Broncos. Here's my thoughts on the subject here. I think if you, the Denver Broncos, if they're in a position where they believe that any of these three guys can emerge, if one of them, Sayre, and look, that's all you need. You need one elite edge rusher, because how easy and how often is it to find really two elite guys? It's very, very rare, very hard to do. But if you have one elite edge rusher, that can make a world of difference. And I think that Denver's got, I think there's potential in each of these three guys that we talked about. An under the radar guy like you talked about is the fourth option there with Ronnie Perkins. Denver might have an elite edge rusher with one of these guys. And I think continued development. I think what Jamar Cain has done coming here into year one, working with Nik Bonitto, once again, reuniting from the college days. You've seen Bonitto take such a huge step so far this year. Bonito's got the athleticism. He's good in terms of tackles for a loss beyond the line of scrimmage. He's improved against the run, even though that was an area going back to last year and a little bit early on this year where you saw some struggles with him. But he's taken such a big performance step, and he's got a lot of improved and demonstrated confidence right now. To me, I think Denver has one of those guys. So to me, I don't think Denver necessarily needs to go out in this year's NFL draft in round 1 or round 2 and go out and get an edge guy, because they have three guys, in my opinion, that are very capable. One of those guys has the potential of that bunch to jump in and become an elite guy. I think that Denver's actually in a good spot here, barring any injury.
I think so too. And I think although no moral victories in the NFL, right? But against Kansas City, you held them, as we talked about in yesterday's show, 4 of 13 on third down plays, 0 for 1 on fourth down. And I think just like we talked about how Jaquan McMillan had something to do with that, so did the pass rushers. These guys were getting after Patrick Mahomes. And what's the key against Patrick Mahomes, right? Not only does your initial rush have to get home, but you got to make sure your secondary rush prevents him from really getting outside and making all those crazy plays outside the pocket that we have seen. Saw some really, really great closing speed from Nik Bonitto in his not only initial rush, but secondary rush when he had to come back and chase Mahomes from behind. Saw him get to him, saw him get some opportunities there. And that ultimately it could start translating into forced fumbles, could start translating into more opportunities for the offense, which then gives you exactly what you're talking about, Cody, that elite presence off the edge, where at any point in the game, you can count on these guys to either close things out or to create a much needed turnover, or the team gets past midfield and they're trying to score before half. All of a sudden, your guy swats the ball out from behind. How many times did we see that from Von Miller in his time in Denver, where he was that guy that kept the team? I don't think people really realize, although we recognize his greatness, do you realize exactly what Von Miller did to keep the Broncos in so many games over a 10-year span, just by doing things like that, by smacking the ball out right before half or pinning a team deep on third down when they're going to score a potential game tying or game winning field goal. He creates situations where it's almost impossible for the offense to have success. You need edge players that can do that. And I think the Broncos do have a few guys, just need to see it more consistently, right? Obviously, we're not expecting anybody to be Von Miller, but can you be a more consistent presence off the edge and grow and develop and continue making plays? So I'm pumped to see against a quarterback like Jordan Love this coming week, Cody, who has held on to the ball quite a bit there in Green Bay. Can these pass rushers take advantage of that? Especially no David Bakhtiari for the Packers and kind of a banged up O-line in general. These pass rushers need to come out and have a big game.
And part of me, the biggest thing too, that I always keep wondering, what if the Broncos interior defensive line starts playing better, right? What if they can generate more push? I think it's going to bode well for any of these guys off the edge here, because you know how hard it is and how difficult it is if you're playing the outside linebacker spot. Obviously, you're going to have some one-on-ones, but you're going to see a lot of chip action. You're going to see running back chip protection and pass pro. You might get a motion guy coming to try to kick you out and block you. That's where your interior D-line has to step up. And while Zach Allen's commanding a lot of attention, Denver needs more from the nose tackle position with DJ Jones, Mike Purcell. They need way more from Jonathan Harris. And that, to me, I think part of me is wondering what the plan is there, because Jonathan Harris continues to kind of be the weak link here on the Broncos defense. There's no pressure, no push up the middle, and that makes it harder for the guys on the outside. So for them to be able to do what they did against Kansas City with Cooper and Bonitto, like you mentioned, being able to bow the pocket, not get too far upfield, not get too sucked in to where they can get outside, they've done a fantastic job with that. And obviously, Jonathon Cooper came up with a big sack against Mahomes this past week on Thursday Night Football. So I like the trajectory of this room and these guys. If they get contributions from more guys at the defensive line on the interior, I think we are going to see the emergence of one of these guys sooner rather than later. In Broncos Country, we are eager for your thoughts here on the outside linebacker position. Can any edge players that are on the team right now, in your opinion, emerge as long-term fixtures for this franchise? Well, let us know if you're watching on YouTube or if you're listening wherever you get your podcasts. Interact with us on social media at Cody Roark NFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. The Broncos will be back on the practice field on Wednesday at the Centura Health Training Center as they prepare for the Green Bay Packers. We'll have you covered every step of the way. Practice recap. We'll take a look at matchups to watch, players to watch, keys to victory, and you're going to get a crossover with Sayre Bedinger and Peter Bukowski this week for Crossover Thursday. That's what you can look forward to here on the Locked On Broncos podcast, Broncos Country. We'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.